So, so welcome everybody to Ali Gelata's Capstone Defense, and congratulations, Ali, on getting to this not penultimate, ultimate point of your MCM experience and MCM journey, I should say. The way today will run is that you have 25 minutes maximum, and please try to pay attention to the time so that we have lots of time for a question period afterwards. We'll have at least one round of questions, if not two, which will be led by your supervisor, Dr. Flynn, followed by your second reader, Mr. Schultz, Professor Schultz, and then I think I am going to ask you a question because I'm going to preview by saying that this is a pretty fascinating piece of work. So it's really well done. Although I shouldn't say these things before you speak. and then we will go to the gallery to see if anybody in the gallery has questions for you. And then we'll see if there's a second round from your supervisor and from your second reader and myself. And once that's through, we will enter into conclave. Terry, Dave, and I will leave for a couple minutes, and then we'll come back with the news. So it's now 10:02. So you have 25 minutes, so until 10:27-ish to speak, and then yours, Al.
Thank you. Thanks for that lovely introduction, Alex. And thanks to everyone for attending. I really appreciate you giving your time. And I know you all have very busy schedules. So thanks for being present for my defense. It's been a long journey, certainly, to get to this point. And I appreciate your time and interest. My research was focused on understanding the communication needs of older adults in order to build organizational trust. And I chose to explore this through the lens of health subject matter. So a brief walkthrough of the agenda, what to expect today. I'll talk about the background, the purpose, why I chose this topic, the research problem that I arrived at, and the research questions that I derived. I'll go through the literature in a way that discusses how I arrived at how and what I would test as far as attributes, qualities, the independent variables, essentially. Then I'll talk about the methodology and data collection and how there was a surprise in all of that, and the findings and some exciting recommendations that I was able to arrive at. I'll discuss the limitations because there were several, and then my conclusions and some opportunities for future research, and then hopefully I can get through my acknowledgements without getting weepy. I'll start by explaining why I chose this complicated topic. Our world is in a state of demographic transition. I'm not just talking about birth and mortality rates. In Canada, it's estimated that by 2030, our senior population will be disproportionate to the working population. So why is this important? Well, it means that for every senior retired from the workforce, we need a certain amount of working age folks, individuals, in order to balance social and economic scales. So how do we ensure capacity for healthcare delivery, something quite important, given this impending shift? Now, with seniors being the fastest growing age group and fastest growing group of digital adopters as well, as far as Canadian statistics go, they're also extraordinarily diverse. And this is something quite important to understand when it comes to digital literacy and preferences, habits, or barriers that they face in a computer-mediated environment. They're often deemed to be less tech savvy, unfortunately. And the reality is organizations in the health sector will inevitably need more nimble and efficient ways to engage stakeholders to support their health needs. So that goes back to my point of growing capacity for healthcare delivery. So we see this already with the introduction of e-health technologies, for example. So in addition to this, health subject matter is still the most frequently or the most commonly accessed information online. And most importantly, as we age, the matter of aging well takes up more of our cognitive capital. So to establish my research problem and line of questioning, I looked to other studies. So a similar study that was conducted on trust in e-health tech in the US and UK through an online questionnaire. I looked at a Canadian study that was similar as focused on e-health, but was testing more of those qualities that improved the experience for older adults or had a negative impact. I looked at a number of studies that were done through Western University here in Ontario with a focus on digital seniors and really understanding the digital divide in Canada. So not looking at just user versus non-user, but really strategically segmenting and understanding that audience. I also looked at studies over time that identified gaps in digital literacy and the communication needs of older adults. And I arrived at my research problem. How and to what extent do older adults determine whether online sources of info and communication about health are trustworthy and credible? And I decided to test trust and credibility as the dependent variables, and ultimately believed that one would dominate in a computer-mediated environment or be more important. I determined attributes, qualities, independent variables to test from the literature. And my core research questions that I wanted to investigate were how and to what extent are digital communications and online sources deemed to be trustworthy and credible through that lens of health. And then I looked at how and to what extent is credibility really determined, and how and to what extent is trust assigned and maintained, to try to separate what the qualities were. So I looked at academic research within a variety of disciplines and industry reports such as the Edelman Trust Barometer, Proof Can Trust Index, and pieces from the Institute for Public Relations to really understand the definitions of trust, and particularly organizational trust. So how trust may change or be reevaluated over time, what may erode trust, and what the decision to trust really entails. And a lot of it really boils down to assessment of risk and vulnerability. So I tried to understand if trust determinants changed in a computer-mediated environment, and the variables from current research indicate that they're quite similar, but they're starting to change as far as recent research goes. Hurley's definition comes from his work published in the Harvard Business Review that explores the decision to trust and aligns really nicely with Grunig and Hahn's dimension of the measurable relationship components, the measurable relationship component of trust specifically. And those components are integrity, dependability, and competence, but I like to reframe it as can and will you do what you say you'll do in a fair and just way that I can depend on. Understanding the definitions of trust led me to risk perception. I wanted to understand how sense of risk influenced decision-making and may increase information bias, resistance to change, but also what strategies help minimize a sense of risk. This helped me to understand how the perspective or perception of risk impacts credibility. So I spent quite a bit of time looking through the works of Paul Slovic, a risk researcher out of the United States, to understand how we consider risk. And it's often a cost-benefit analysis, so risk versus reward. And risk perception has long been associated with the introduction of new technology. So Slovic addressed the importance of two-way communication in his work and the duty specifically for health organizations to understand stakeholder risk perception. Slovic also introduced the effect heuristic, which took the research beyond just looking at risk assessment as either analytical or experimental, based on experimenting over time. And this led me to consider the connection to Grunig and Hahn's concept of control mutuality, and what power imbalance a stakeholder would be willing to accept in exchange for information that really helped improve their health. So qualities of credible sources were then my focus, and I looked through bundles of research through Stanford's Web Credibility Project, and then more recent studies in Canada, and this helped me develop a long list of potential qualities to test. And now, Jacob Nielsen has done extensive work in the field of usability and user experience, so I evaluated his 10 usability heuristics, which have been refined significantly over time, and identified barriers, cognitive load, issues with cognitive load, recognition and recall issues, and standard conventions in tried and tested human-centered design for web interfaces in order to help me really understand what might impact credibility or trust. So following that, I evaluated the connection between usability and organization public relationships in an online environment and PR as a practice. So the value of digital assets are well known and we can measure more effectively in a digital environment. Yet the practice of PR or marketing or an integrated approach still demonstrates a lack of consideration for usability principles and heuristics. So Kirk Callahan's work is focused on addressing the need for inclusion of this in the PR practitioner toolkit. I then moved on to look at digital literacy and information accessibility and how organizations can provide communication that doesn't just inform older adults, it educates them, empowers them. I also needed to understand the digital divide more adequately in Canada and what that really looked like. So this 2018 study out of Western University really helped me because it identified these 5 types of users that you'll see on my screen rather than user versus non-user, which is quite often the case. This also helped me understand a network reliance that was present and how peers and social circles have an influence on perceptions and opinions and beliefs and even habits online. And I tied this all together by looking at qualities of symmetrical communications and measurable relationship components, which equate to excellence and successful organization public relationships. So in health communication, the mixed motive model would likely result in perception of mutual benefit and potentially yield improved credibility and trust. And I also considered how scholars had revised these 4 models as we move into digital media. So here is an illustration of the many potential attributes, variables, qualities, whatever you wish to call them, that might have an influence on credibility and trust. And it's not limited to these, but out of the literature, I had to extract as much as possible that was relevant and listed as among quality within a digital environment. That was tricky. And then I have to look at, then I wanted to pursue looking at how and which one would be most important with regard to the subject matter of health. And boom, surprise context for the study. Before I discuss my methodology, I need to address the surprise context of this study. I did not anticipate the data collection would take place during a global pandemic. No one anticipated this. However, with quarantine and closures, communication and interaction largely took place online, even with your trusted medical professional. So we were all focused to some extent or forced into a computer-mediated environment. It's also important to note that health was in the headlines and top of mind for most Canadians, especially those at a higher risk, which for the most part was and is our senior population. So as I just discussed, pandemic altering things, everything was circulated, my data collection methods were circulated and completed online. So I had 206 seniors complete the online survey that I created, and 10 participants complete in-depth interviews with me online through web conferencing or by phone. So the survey rendered quantitative data for statistical analysis, and I also had 2 open-ended questions to which I received answers, more than 50 answers to those questions from respondents, which I felt was statistically significant, with 25%-ish of the respondents opting to provide more information. So I took that and I created a corpus for further study of that unstructured data. And then I used Amazon Comprehend, which is a natural language processing application, to evaluate and extract key phrases and keywords to get a richer understanding of what was being said, what commonalities existed. And for the in-depth interview analysis, I evaluated the transcripts and manually extracted common themes in the discourse. I need to note, at the bottom, you'll see the wonderful recruitment partners that I had that circulated my call for survey respondents, my call for interview participation. I gathered more than I expected to, and even more requests for interviews than I expected to, which was wonderful. So to look at the findings, the qualitative interviews, 7 core themes emerged, which was really exciting. So first and foremost, it was that expertise and authority and transparency build trust and credibility. Advertising and solicitation of any kind has no part in this, and it creates a sense of risk and bias. Credible sources are relevant, current, and consistent with other sources. Simplicity in design and usability lessens a sense of risk and supports credibility. And more direct communication and dialogue is really desired with experts and professionals to build trust. There is a major concern about disinformation, misinformation, information overwhelm or overload, fake news scams, and privacy issues. And this group is also becoming more reliant on peer, family, friend, their network, social circle, and like-minded support to guide decision-making as it happens in a digital context. So I extracted some very strong language that I felt needed to be shared with regard to the concerns over promotional language in advertising. And as you can see, these are very strong sentiment pieces that it's a huge turnoff for these individuals, these being my participants in the interviews. They feel bombarded by health ads. And the most concerning is the quote below, that this particular digital senior understands that the ad that comes up first isn't necessarily the most credible source, but fears that other seniors really don't understand that that's not the most relevant, credible source. It's in fact a paid ad. So survey data, I'm just going to go through a couple tables that I found really, really interesting. The majority of my respondents possessed a post-secondary education, roughly 70% college diploma, certificate, or university graduate or undergraduate degree, which also indicates that this sample is truly digital seniors. There is a vast amount of statistics and research that indicates that higher levels of education equate to people being more digital or tech savvy. The majority felt quite comfortable navigating the web to find information. And again, that lends to this sample being of people that are digital seniors. They have access to the internet. They don't rely on a public library to access the internet. It's in their homes. So that all played a role in this, and it's why I'm calling them digital seniors. The most common tasks that they perform online were email, web searches, purchases, banking, reading the news. They were not fond of social media for interaction or finding health information, nor were they comfortable with instant messaging, web chats. Forums were relatively new and very few respondents addressed that. So that I felt was significant to note as well. Of the most common sources with regard to health listed, I found this kind of striking, that although the most common sources were Mayo Clinic, local health services, federal government, and news media, they're not necessarily what these individuals were identifying as the most credible. However, I think there's also some context at work here, because regional public health being local health, that's where everyone was going for regional data in the middle of a pandemic. News media as well, and hearing from our federal government about what was happening. Least common sources accessed also shocked me as well, because these aren't necessarily the least credible. Corporations, pharmaceutical and pharmacy, hospitals, clinician and medical professional websites, and university websites, which have often contained very important new emerging research about health. So of the survey findings, I extracted the core variables or attributes, qualities, whatever you'd like to call them, that impact both credibility and a willingness to trust health information. And the first and foremost important was a presence of facts, then current information, the reputation of that source, consistency and a connection with other reputable sources, recognized and reputable authorship, and presence of opinions and recommendations, which is exciting to be able to extract from this. The most influential factors in perception of positive credibility were accuracy and completeness of the information, confidence in a communication exchange, so there's privacy involved there, and security, reputation of the sender, or being referred by another reputable source, and the speed of response time, which indicates a need for quick dialogue. Most influential factors in the perception to trust were these core three. So knowing the organization, but not necessarily the individual sender, which also lends to that, is it credible? Is it reputable? Do I know of this organization? Will I trust that individual representing the organization? Second to that was knowing the individual sender of the message personally. So having an existing relationship, probably a trusted relationship, and legitimacy of the content shared. Is it valid? Is it logical? Which lends to consistent, accurate, and fact-based. So using the natural language processing application, I extracted the following important results with keywords and key phrases that were rendered. Knowing the source is important. Clarity and a focus of information is critical. Quality and presentation and design of that source is also important, and presence of expertise from the professionals, health medical professionals. So there were limitations in this study. I used non-probability sampling techniques, so mainly convenience and snowball sampling. Perhaps the most glaring limitation, at least to me, is that this is not representative of the Canadian population of seniors, unfortunately. We have more than 6.5 million Canadian seniors, and more than 2.5 of which reside in the province of Ontario alone. So this doesn't necessarily represent that vast population. Recruitment also took place purely online and by phone, and I really had hoped that, you know, when I set out on this study, I wanted to do some pen to paper surveys. I wanted to do in-person interviews so that I could connect with seniors that were part of that non-user or apprehensives in that segmentation of the digital divide. But that unfortunately wasn't possible. And I feel there's a real need still to understand what barriers they face to an extent to get them online, and understanding how to use and trust information as more health services rely on e-health technology to facilitate healthcare delivery. So timing and context is very important in this study. What would the results have looked like prior to the pandemic? I'll never know. But certainly there's an opportunity to look post-pandemic, what trust and credibility in health information looks like. So this is very much pandemic context results. The exciting piece that I arrived at was a clear set of recommendations, and I wish that I had realized if I had reorganized it, it spelled clear when I submitted my paper, but it just came together in the presentation really nicely. And it is a very clear framework that I devised for clear communication with an older audience that would support health communicators in prioritizing and devising strategies that improve the potential of building trust with this stakeholder group, and understanding the value of a segmented approach to this model. So consistency and sector collaboration could establish a partner stakeholder as being quite important, which would provide continuity for publics. So information, voice and messaging separate, need to be consistent among organizations and institutions with similar objectives to reach and engage an older audience. Leveraging the business to consumer model in developing communication strategies could create a trust continuum. So working more closely with clinicians and researchers and policymakers that also influence this stakeholder group. Education that bridges health literacy and digital literacy is needed. Collectively, health literacy is unfortunately still quite lacking, as far as the research indicates, for seniors in Canada. So health communicators should consider their blend and how they use rhetoric to drive information, and consider education rather than simply careful persuasion and information. Authorship and expertise is critical to provide transparency and legitimacy. Health communicators need to work more closely with subject matter experts in medicine, policy research, executive leadership. And lastly, consider reducing barriers to access online information and channels for communication. So health communicators really need to understand and evaluate usability heuristics and analyze over time. They also need to understand web conventions, accessibility, and focus on applying human-centered design to digital initiatives for success. So arriving at my conclusions and opportunities for future research, first and foremost, I would love to see the mobilization of this framework by health communicators using it to improve their strategic prioritization of programs and campaigns. I think this contributes to a growing body of research that's really important, and it addresses the needs of an aging population and those who are increasingly more dependent on health information online. It also provides for opportunities for further research to address the need for really strategic segmentation of this group and determine which of those influential factors or in the CLEAR model, which would be more important to further that strategic prioritization. There's also opportunities to explore the connection between disciplines: user experience, human-centered design, PR, communications. And lastly, I'd like to see that we address the growing need for digital literacy, improving digital literacy among older adults, and potentially look at the need to combine education with health literacy to improve their confidence online and improve their health ultimately. So if I have time left, on the right, you'll see my family. That's my husband, Joe, and our children, Lachlan, Keaton, and Rowan. And they are my most important persons. They're my MVPs, my entire life. They managed the challenges of MCM right by my side and encouraged me and loved me. And that's my team of 5, and I love them fiercely. And it really does take a village. That's a complete understatement, but I have the absolute best village, and some are listening right now. Thank you, Terry, for helping me complete this project. I felt like it was against all odds, if I'm to be a little dramatic, including I sustained a concussion in the winter, and then I homeschooled 3 kids during a pandemic. So circumstances were not ideal, but I appreciate your support. Really grateful to have both Dave and Alex involved today, because I will say your commitment to students is strong and sincere, and I appreciate it through my journey. And MCM 11, you guys are the best. I adore and respect each and every one of you. And if this were the Oscars, I would be getting my music cue to get off the stage. So thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you, Ali. And you were 1 minute before time, and I'll insert an editorial comment in saying what a pleasure it has been to have you in the program and to work with you up to now
Thank
as well. So I got you on that. You care as much as we do, certainly, and it's wonderful. So now we'll move to the question period. So the first question goes to your supervisor, Dr. Flynn.
Well, first and foremost, congratulations. This has been a tremendous journey, and I'm glad that we have crossed this threshold and have got you to this point. Your research really resonates for me, because a lot of the reason I did the work I've done in consulting and academia really rests with Paul Slavick's work in risk communication, mostly in risk communications, and to look how, in fact, that initial seminal work has applicability in other fields as well. So, you talked about that notion of trusted source and trusted organization, but we know that trust is a really personal, interpersonal attribute. We trust people because we have some level of interaction with them, and trust as that halo effect, because you use the words, reputation and reputable sources almost interchangeably as well. So how do organizations build trust through these mediated environments or channels, when in fact the channel is clogged with crap? That's an academic word, by the way.
Yeah. I think first and foremost, based on my findings, that education driving the communication is critical. That is something that's valuable. Obtaining knowledge and feeling more empowered is valuable. And what I saw in these gaps was that there's a gap in health literacy, or there's lacking health literacy collectively. There's lacking digital literacy collectively, and we have this massively diverse group. How do you find ways to empower people and do that through communications without just focusing on delivering information that would be helpful to them? So I think that there's this real opportunity to cut through the crap, if you want to call it, to really focus on that education and empowerment piece. And that's what you're providing as far as value to that stakeholder group. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So let me give you a bit of a contrarian perspective.
Okay.
So what if I trust the source so much that the health information that they are giving me is actually wrong? What if I go out and by chlorine because I can wash my body of COVID, or I take unsupported medication because somebody I believe is doing the right thing, their health information is paramount to trusted and respected health sources.
Well, I would hope that an organization wouldn't be operating so unethically, but I understand where you're coming from on that. And I think this goes back to that whole fear of disinformation, misinformation, and fake news. So if we were to, I like this perspective and I understand where you're coming from on it. I think that there is also this need potentially for the healthcare system to identify that there's a lot of that out there, disinformation, misinformation, and perhaps that's an opportunity for them to collectively champion working to eliminate that. Because a lot of what came out of my research was this need for consistency from source to source. Please tell me the same thing. Show me that you're connected to each other and that this is a network that I can rely on.
Yeah. Well, I think what it just exposes a little bit is this notion that trust is such a powerful proponent, but also limit barrier to action, right? Because if I trust something, I'm not likely going to take a countervailing perspective into consideration, whether that's right or wrong. So I think the key for anything that we do in terms of that, how do you build that trust that is in fact impenetrable in some respects? That's all I have, Alex, for now.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you, Terry. We'll go on to Dave Schultz.
Okay. Thank you, Ali. That was really good. There was a number of times I was reading the paper and you were presenting and I was going, yes, I completely agree with this. So I was very glad to see some of this. I want to follow up on, and by the way, when you went from doing in-person interviews to have to do online because of COVID, well done with that. I actually think you got a great result out of it because talking to a digitally aware population for the first phase or wave of this is important to understand where they are. Now, I think it's important, as you say in your follow-up, to go talk to other people and see how this model fits with them. I want to follow up on Terry said, because trust and credibility of message is huge in this area. When you interviewed people, did the in-depth interview, did you find a hesitancy or an uncertainty when they were reading or going and looking at online materials? Were they putting a level of skepticism in front of it, or were they looking at it in terms of, well, of course it's reliable? Like, was there an active skeptical lens going out there, or are they accepting more than you think? What did you find?
That's a really good question. And there's definitely something there. I'm not sure if it was skepticism, but it was a lot of information overload and frustration. There were barriers addressed, like why is it different from this website to this website? I don't know how to use this. I don't know how to find what I'm looking for, or I'm frustrated. I just want to talk to someone, but I know the information's there and they're probably going to point me there. So yeah, I don't know if I would call it skepticism as far as their collective opinion. I think that there was more so frustration, and real frustration if the language, the information was written in an overly persuasive way, or it was too much to go through. There was definitely like a cognitive load issue for many of the participants, because I recall them saying things like, it's too much, I can't find what I'm looking for, it needs to be easier to use, I know the information is there, I know the ability to talk to someone is through this channel, but I can't get to it. That was largely the sentiment shared. I'd call it frustration more than skepticism. But my last note to that would be that there seemed to be a lot of I give up kind of talk, like this, I give in, I give up. I guess this is just, I got to use my common sense, and I have to trust this source because I'm told to trust this source.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's interesting. Right now, I'm doing a lot of work professionally with vaccines and the aging population. And we're working with them to help understand perceptions, awareness, likelihood of getting a vaccine, what's stopping them. But the discussion about how to communicate is not often, I'm not researching that. Um, and this whole piece about using persuasive language and how it actually detracts from it in some ways that you found is important. So, what is the next step for you? Because in the industry of people that are communicating these pieces of information, I think some of this would be interesting to start to learn and start to think about. And actually, I'm probably going to change a couple of questions in a survey I have coming up because based on what I read, because I do think there's this sense that we need, when you talk about control mutuality, what are you willing to give up from control in order to get this piece of information? But it's information, not persuasiveness. So that's changing things a little bit on how people communicate in this area. So what are your next steps with this?
Oh, wow.
Or are there next steps to this? Are you going to get off this phone, have a great lunch or dinner with the family, and that's it?
No, I don't. I have so many ideas. I know that, and I'll call Mary Tawes out because Mary and I have this shared passion for really understanding this as a potential issue. And I spoke to it earlier in my background introduction to why I want to look at this because. And Mary and I just had a conversation. We're like, I want people to understand that how we take care of our older adult population and the diversity that exists there is one of our biggest challenges that we're going to face in the next decade or two, along with climate change. And it's not something we see championed enough. So I think my next steps would be to see, I know Terry has mentioned that he wants me to have another discussion with McMaster's Institute for Research on Aging to see if there's opportunities to share this within that network, because I think as a starting point to get into this understanding of, education is power or learning is power with this age group, I think it's likely to resonate with them. With that whole, looking at control mutuality and what will I give up in order to have that knowledge and improve my health and feel empowered to age well. I don't have like a long-term plan. I want to have one, but that's for tomorrow.
That's
Thanks,
after
Alex.
lunch.
That's after lunch.
No.
Alex?
Yeah, so I have a question. Which, and I know you didn't treat this directly in your thesis, your capstone, but just kind of more of an informational or interest question. Which argument do you think they find most persuasive, right? Because within, like Terry was talking about, is it the argument from celebrity? Is it the argument from, from authority, tradition? I'm just asking you to speculate.
Well, I will tell you in the interviews, celebrity endorsement or someone outside of that field of expertise is really not well received. I wish I could use some of those quotes, but they included some strong language. I think that there is this real importance to understand that although your organization may have a specific subject matter expert that you put forward, there's this need to look at your larger circle and duty to this population and leverage others, build relationships with, say, policymakers or researchers that you can connect with, and provide more of an influential connected panel to this group, because that's more likely to be perceived as credible. As like going back to the results in my or the findings from my study is that connection among reputable sources is so important to build both credibility and trust. Does that answer your question, Alex?
Yeah, so actually building reputation is key then, right? To with this demographic, because they actually read stuff and they pay attention to things. Is and they tend to be skeptical of celebrity, as you're saying.
Absolutely.
That's interesting. I mean that's a really fertile ground for public relations practice, right?
There's also a need for, I think, really careful exploration of the language, because although something can be helpful and persuasive, there's, out of the interviews, a few of my interviewees said, why are they trying to scare me? Why are they trying to scare me into making a decision? So that's really important. So although, communicators may be trying to demonstrate, the severity of a situation or the potential ramifications of not taking action, it's really going to turn them off. And fear doesn't necessarily result in action.
Mm-hmm. Oh, very interesting. Yeah, thank you for that.
Thanks for your question.
Now we'll go to do you have another round, Terry or Dave?
Yeah, I have a one other question. In terms of methodology, you talked about using Amazon Comprehend. Some people might not be familiar with that, but tell me, how did you use it? How did you find it helpful? And what recommendations would you have for other MCM students who might want to use that in their future data analysis?
So it was helpful for me to be able to look at extracting all of these responses, which often had spelling errors or like just quick responses that were half sentences. And I thought, like, how do I make sense of this? I was going through and manually scoring them, but I said, okay, I need to identify or use a platform. And I did a lot of research in this to figure out what was going to be best. I used, so Amazon Comprehend is Amazon's natural language processing tool, which you create a document or just a basic Excel file and drop in, kind of clean up the language to eliminate incomplete sentences or accidental spelling errors, things like that, and then feed it through that system, and it extracts common words and provides you a confidence rating as to how confident that system is that it's a common theme in that corpus that I created. Does that explain it enough? It was helpful, and I think there's a lot more that I could have done with it.
Is there a cost to it?
There is, if you have a very large data set.
Right. Okay. That's all I have.
Thanks, Terry.
Dave?
Question. Looking ahead to people who might want to do research in this area as well, did you talk to anyone who had a chronic condition or who was a caregiver of someone of a chronic condition? And do you see that impacting results?
So one of my interviewees did share with me that they had a chronic condition. What I found in that interview was we ended up getting into more about that information seeking and trying to find support from like-minded individuals. So that's where that whole peer and opinion and trying to grow that network of support to find information. And this individual lives alone as well. So everything during COVID forced online, and even more challenging to get the answers needed.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Well, if there are no more questions from your committee, we can now open the floor to questions, question or two, because we have a little bit of time from the gallery. So is there anybody who'd like to ask a question or make a comment?
Hi, it's Mary. I hope it's okay that I just jumped in.
Hi.
Hi, that was excellent, Allie. It was really excellent. I really enjoyed it. Can't wait to read the full paper. I just wanted to, I don't know if it's a question, but more of a comment. that an interesting area based on what you've outlined today is how the many volunteers and sort of people who are doing communications off the side of their desk could benefit from your expertise. Because I think a lot of the suggestions you made would be fine, I think, for people maybe who have, you know, been through MCM or other similar programs who could then execute, but I think there's so much need for your expertise and help and things you've outlined in this paper. So I just wanted to come off mute and say that and say thanks for your contributions. And I can't wait to force you to work with me. It's gonna be great.
You're not forcing me at all. Thanks for that comment, Mary. I know I feel like there's so much to do and so much opportunity. And as Terry said, I should do it this afternoon, but I'm not doing it this afternoon.
I'm joking.
I'll start thinking about it tomorrow.
Have at least one glass of water before you start doing it.
Any other questions from the public? Oh, seeing none. Do we have any further questions from the committee?
Nope.
No? All right. So what we will do now is we will leave and we'll mute ourselves. So Terry, Dave, please mute and also turn your video off.
Alex, I'll call you all.
Okay, and Terry will call everybody, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Hey, folks, we're back. And hi. Hope you guys had it. Oh, it's nice to see everybody's face. So I introduced Terry to give you the news.
So that was a pretty extensive deliberation. I mean, I'm exhausted by how long it took us to sort of go over this. And, you know, like we said earlier this week, if we had more time, we would take more time, but we didn't need that much time. I want to congratulate you, Ali, on receiving high honors on this degree and this capstone. The discussion was that it was a well-written paper, that it was well-researched. Your presentation today was first class, and we think that there's more opportunity in the MCM community to build a center of excellence or some kind of group excellence to focus on this ongoing research and maybe even a course in health communications that could be maybe team taught by people, although we have no idea how we do that. So congratulations, well done. Welcome to the MCM community. You get to put the MCM letters right behind your name as of today. You can have that drink of water if that's what you want. But I want to also acknowledge Ali's husband, Joe, and her kids and her very noisy dog who usually snored during our meetings, and all of her family and obviously her cohort for the support that you've given each other through this journey. So I think that's critically important as we go through. So congratulations. We look forward to, after a short pause, to having a conversation about what we do with this and what we do with this, what you do with this, and where you go, we go from here, because I think this is a great opportunity. Congratulations, Ali.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Ali.
Welcome to the family. Welcome to the alumni family.
That's my dog.
And look at the dog. You know, my mother once told me that, you know, there is nobody more interested in your academic research than you. So that looks like your dog's sentiment as well.
Yeah.
Congrats, everybody. Well done.
All right.
Oh, thank you so much.
Well done.
Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to upcoming capstones, hopefully soon.
Yes.
All the best, everybody. Bye-bye.